آشنایان ره عشق در این بحر عمیق غرقه گشتند و نگشتند به آب آلوده هلتن.
همه شب در این امیدم که نسیم صبحگاهی به پیام آشنایان بنوازد آشنا را. الف بده حاجی.
اگر آن ترک شیرازی به دست دارد دل ما را.
حواست کجاست عزیزم؟ چرا قرمزه؟
اگر آن ترک شیرازی به دست دارد دل ما را.
آقا
نه
از اون کیکایی که اون دفعه دادیم بازم
بله
میدی؟
بله حتما. بابا جان بیا. آقا بسن بیا. قول میده یه بهتر شه برام. اینو بده به اون ماشین بغلی. دست درد نکنه.
چی میگی پسر جون؟ چی میگی؟ گل چی؟
بده ساقی می باقی که در جنت نخواهی یافت، کنار آب رکناباد و گلگشت مصلا را.
The short film you just saw sets an aura, I hope, for what follows. I'm Michael Lissack, the president of the American Society for Cybernetics, and I'm here to talk to you today about the idea that progress seldom comes from hate. What is it that taking a cybernetics perspective on Rancor can do to help overcome the persistent problems of hatred and polarization in our society? In the media, in our public life, in our private life, in our gatherings, in our phone conversations, in our chats, Rancor is everywhere. Our dialogue has somehow become hate-filled monologue. Our leaders set an unfortunate example. Coming from what is called the left, some ask, should I stop speaking to my Trump-supporting friends, or worse, to my Trump-voting friends? From the right, the reaction is, I hate the left. I hate being called deplorable. How do I speak with these people? Where we used to have debate, discussion, and dialogue, we now just have competing, overriding monologues. There no longer seems to be a way to reconcile two sides of an issue, two perspectives. This Black Friday ad from Patagonia sums it up. We're all screwed. So don't tell us that we can imagine a healthy future, because the reality is it's too late to fix the climate crisis, and we don't trust anyone who says we need to demand a livable planet because we don't have a choice. But Patagonia says, now read the ad from the bottom up. Because we don't have a choice, we need to demand a livable planet, and we don't trust anyone who says it's too late to fix the climate crisis, because the reality is we can imagine a healthy future. So don't tell us that we're all screwed. In today's world, ambiguity is very threatening. Sometimes when confronted with ambiguity, we don't see the second and third order effects, with the result that we end up acting against our own best interests. The idea of rational discourse has seemingly died. Why? Because what we're presented with is the need to win, winner take all. But that's not what discourse is about. Discourse is about trying to find agreement, about welcoming difference, about trying on other points of view to see what works, about finding the common in the contradictory, tolerating anxiety, searching for synthesis, and ultimately coming to a reframing. If we were to summarize what discourse is about, it's about respect. And respect is a two-syllable word, re and spect. Re is again, and spect is to view. When we treat others with respect, we're treating them as if we're going to encounter them over and over and over again, which is very different than winner take all. The very idea that we can exchange in meaningful discourse with others who hold different views has unfortunately gone past its sell-by date. Where 10 years ago, this may have been great, we can talk to one another, we can find common ground. Today, we are deep in a trough of disillusionment. And the question is there any way out? We ignore the complex. We ignore anything other than first order effects. So second order, third order, they're all disregarded. We pretend that we're in a simple, ordered, regular, ceteris paribus regime. Rules get honored far more in the breach than in observance. And what happens is that we all seem willing to game the system because we know we're not being authentic. We're not being real.
Whoopi stepped in to cool things down.
Everybody, just take a breath, because now it's becoming hard to. I'm sorry, but people. Hold on, let me just finish what I'm saying, so that I can just say. Everybody has something to say at the table. We really do want to hear from everybody, but we're starting to do that thing. Right. And so I don't know what that means. This thing. It means you're talking over each other.
It's not just our media that aggravates the problem. It's also our social media. Our social media algorithms try to make like find like, making it easy to find those who agree with us and easy to label those who disagree horrible, deplorable. We don't need bad actors. We have social media. What results is a huge inability to find a common ground. We don't know how to even define what a common ground might be. There's us and there's them. No matter how close to someone else you may be with regard to one topic, you could be diametrically opposed in another. And in our present age, that results in, well, you can see. The philosophy of Martin Buber might be helpful here. Buber distinguishes between an I-thou relationship, where we treat the other with respect, and an I-it, where we treat others as objects. In I-it, the other becomes something I can name, I can classify, I can establish where this other thing, because you're a thing, not a person, fits into my worldview. Can you be manipulated into helping me? If not, then maybe I should just dismiss you, or defend against you, or fight you. I-it has permeated our present world. The dissonance, the cacophony, the overwhelming, overriding, competing monologues have destroyed our ability to treat each other with respect, to find common ground, and to realize that we're all in this together, like it or not. All that results is confusion and anger, which of course we then must direct to someone else and not to ourselves. And when we ask why this horribleness has occurred, as I told you, cybernetics has an answer, or at least a perspective on an answer. The first great cybernetician was Sir Winston Churchill. After the Nazis had destroyed the House of Commons, the question became how to rebuild. Should they rebuild? And Churchill said, we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. In effect, he said, We shape our context. We pick the context that we deal with, and that context, afterwards, it shapes us. A cybernetics perspective on the problem of the origins of our rancor requires exposing some presuppositions. At the most basic, we need to recognize that as humans, we are cognitively limited. We've been given the mental equipment to at most deal with 3 to 5 unrelated things at the same time. I need to repeat that. We are capable of only dealing with 3 to 5 unrelated things at the same time. Give us more and problems arise. But we don't live in a world that can be adequately categorized or labeled by 3 to 5 unrelated things. The world we inhabit, the world we live in, the world we must deal with is more complex than our feeble brains are capable of cognizing. And as Dr. Spock warned us, insufficient facts always invite danger. The pragmatist Richard Rorty taught us that knowledge is not about getting things right. It's about finding a way of coping. We need to acquire habits that allow us to better cope. One of those habits is that we have a false belief in the power of simplicity, in the idea that we must simplify things because that is the key to getting things done. We simplify so as to better cope with our present context. We try to keep things to that 3 to 5 limit, so we simplify. But those simplifications are dangerous. They introduce mismatches. Our shortcut, our simplification, is not the same as the world we function in. Our simplification is not the same as the world we talk about. Our shortcuts, our labels, our categories, our simplifications are not the same as the world we attend to. We give lip service to the idea of understanding. One way we simplify is to assign or ascribe a label. Other times, we find and apply a simplifying heuristic. Still other times, we need to develop a model. We try to find a simplification, a shortcut that allows us to deal not with the world, but with our model of the world. And we use those labels, heuristics, and models to tell a story. Because a story relates things together. And now we have a nice shortcut simplification. It may not be someone else's, but we have the one we use. These simplifications become the context from which we view things, in which we act, and about which we base our perceptions and our methodologies for coping. That context determines what it is that we perceive. Our expectations play a key role in shaping how we experience our action and how we understand their outcomes. When we perceive, we are making a choice, and perception can be difficult because the same action, the same pattern, can create multiple traces. We are picking the one that we choose in our present simplification, in our present shortcut. Note, as we live our long lives, we encounter similar stories, similar experiences, and we will categorize them. We will label them. We will apply heuristics to them, and we will tell a varying set of stories. As we do something, as we encounter something, We get cued into a prior story, into a prior context. The cueing frames how we see things. When we go to perceive, we make use of all the simplifications that have come before us. Because our method of coping is to simplify. To use an analogy from Isaiah Berlin, we are not foxes. Foxes seek the next advantage, but rather we are hedgehogs, trying to defend our status quo. We are after a stable equilibrium, not change. When it comes to the notion of discourse, of dealing with others, of dealing with other points of view, what foxes do, I've listed on this slide. But the very things that a fox does is what we're not doing. We give lip service to doing these things. We announce that we expect others to take the position of doing them, but it's not what we ourselves do. Instead, we are a hedgehog, looking to preserve status quo, looking to make sure that ceteris paribus holds, looking for a stable equilibrium. So let's ask what it is that defines or constrains this kind of behavior. Most important is a principle called least action. A good hedgehog always tries to figure out what can accomplish the most results with the least effort. We call this the least action principle, and we use it to defend where we are today against where we might end up tomorrow. I've borrowed this illustration from this Cynefin world developed by Dave Snowden. What you need to see is the escalator that allows us to find simplicity, to go from the complex up to the clear. And it is much easier to take that escalator on the way up. What is hard, what would be required if we were a fox, is to figure out how to shut the escalator off and to climb down the stairs, to go from the clear to the complex. But no, it is easier to simplify, to take that direct escalator, eliminate the complexities, assert simplicity, regardless of the cost. One of the cybernetic greats, Ross Ashby, had a notion of this, which he called stable equilibrium. Ashby asserted that it was in our nature to always attempt to assert, to find, to preserve a stable equilibrium. When things happened, when we were perturbed, when we received outside information, our first reaction, the reaction of a hedgehog, is to figure out what we can do to allow our stable equilibrium to be preserved. If we were a fox, we would say, what can we do to take advantage of it? But as a hedgehog, our goal, keep stability, keep the equilibrium going. Unfortunately, our cognitive limits get in our way. If we had the ability to process more unrelated variables, we might develop better models. Perhaps we could consider second, third, and higher order effects. But instead, our notion of least action, of least effort, is very restricted, and we are stuck with asserting simplicities, whether they work, whether they belong, and at the expense of the simplicities offered by others, because simplification is a least action. Ashby did research on this very topic, and he came up with what we call the law of requisite variety. That law says things work when the number of options available in response is equal to the number of problems being presented. When there's a mismatch in the variety of the problem and the variety of the available responses, there are problems. Stable equilibrium demands requisite variety. One of the ways we attempt to achieve requisite variety is to keep things in the known and knowable sections of the world. There, perhaps, our limited cognitive abilities and our limited sense of response might work. But the sad truth is, far too often, we actually are in the complex and chaotic parts of the world. And there, requisite variety escapes us, stability escapes us, and it threatens our very sense of identity. So, what cybernetics teaches us about how we go about defending the status quo, how we go about our hedgehog behavior, is that we reject disconfirming evidence. We will repackage and rename anything that can be subsumed into our existing labels, into our existing models, or our existing heuristics. We will regard the new and the different as alien, as threatening. The current way is the way we perceive to be correct or right, and any other path is perceived as being wrong, because these simplifications are the key to our identity and are the key to our ability to maintain requisite variety. And as a result, talking to others is like talking to a wall. It's become useless unless the others already agree with us. There is no discussion. There is just warring monologues. Cybernetics does not just help us diagnose what's wrong. It also helps us find the tools to move forward in a productive manner. Cybernetic tools start with the idea of systems, where situations and relationships are examined as part of something else. We've already talked about requisite variety, but there are three more. One is the idea of circularity. Feedback plays an important role in how cybernetics examines situations or systems. Reflexivity, where it is important for the observer and the actor to examine their own role in constructing the reality that they choose to deal with, or in limiting the perceptions of the actual reality to some field about which they then pay attention. And finally, this notion of constructivism, or constructing what it is that we opt to actually deal with, and recognizing that what we deal with is a choice. Again, we are cognitively limited creatures, and because of our cognitive limitations, we cannot deal with the entire world as it is. We must choose aspects of the world to deal with. That act of choice is done from a reflexive and circular perspective, or at least that is the perspective of cybernetics. Remember, our cognitive constraint involves the number of unrelated items. So if we can find relations, we can help deal with that constraint. This suggests that instead of simplifying, assigning a label, throwing things out, trying to make things simpler, instead we should be looking for relatedness. What is it that things have in common? How can we find the relationship in order to lower the number of variables we're dealing with? If the goal is understanding, we need to begin by asking questions which involve how and why. Not what, not when, not where, but how and why. The secret is to get to the foundation that allows any shortcut, any simplification, or any assumption to work. What is it in the context, the background, the other assumptions that allow that shortcut, that assumption to have meaning and to work in the context in which it's being deployed? Which means we need to focus on the process by which we and others choose what it is out of the many varied environments that we're dealing with that we choose to attend to. Because again, we only can attend to 3 to 5 unrelated things. We're making a choice. How did we choose them? Why did we choose them? At the same time, it remains important to give present context its due. We do things and we make choices in light of the present context in which we find ourselves. There's a set of questions we can always be asking. Are we looking at the right things in our environment? Are we sufficiently self-aware of our beliefs? Do we know the limitations of what it is that we think that we know? Do we have the right words, right models, or right representations to express what it is we are thinking about? I come back to Martin Buber and the notion of I-thou. Treating the other as a thou, with full respect, with the idea that you will be encountering them then and again, means that you don't brush over the shortcuts and the simplifications that they are using. Instead, you need to probe. What is it about those shortcuts that makes them work for the other person? What is it about the label, the heuristic, the model, the story? If you can figure out what it is about that simplification that allows the other person to make use of it and to take it for granted, you've gone a long way to bridging the gap into true discourse and into treating them as an I-thou relationship. As they said in a Wendy's commercial long ago, where's the beef? So enough with my rattling on about theory. Let's talk about how we might do this. One how is a method called Buberian dialogue, and it was first deployed by the British Mensa Society in the 1960s. I made use of it when I was teaching at the Central European University in Budapest, and it worked wonders in bridging the gap between the Farmers Union and Monsanto so that they could come together and find common ground regarding genetically modified organisms and food. Traditional debates are I-it, both between the two protagonists and between the speakers and the audience. Buberian dialogue shifts the focus to the audience. The protagonists and the audience have an I-thou relationship with one another. Buberian dialogue works by making insights that members of the audience have both the focus of the learning overall and of the subsequent discussion that takes place. The format looks somewhat like a traditional debate. There are two protagonists, a moderator, but there's also a whiteboard keeper and three distinguished listeners. It is critical that there be an audience of interested parties of not less than 15 or 20 people. And it is also critical that the two protagonists have views that are somewhat opposed. They could be orthogonal, but they must not agree with each other. In the beginning, each protagonist is asked to give an opening statement. The focus then turns to the audience. They are asked, what is it that you heard that was common to what these two said? Be it explicit, something that was left out, or something that was treated as a common background assumption. These audience observations are posted on the whiteboard, visible to all. And note, we need a moderator who keeps people to the point. Then, the protagonists are each given 5 to 10 minutes to talk about what is on the whiteboard. Not what each other said, not a response, but talk about what is on the whiteboard. And again, we need a strong moderator to keep the protagonists to this point. The focus is on what the audience has said as noted on the whiteboard. The cycle gets repeated. Audience members reveal what they heard in common, and the protagonists speak to the whiteboard items. And then one holds a comfortable coffee break. The idea is to create a context where the audience members, the protagonists, and every other participant feel comfortable talking. Be sure to have good refreshments. The coffee break happened before the audience members got a chance to speak the last time, so we do 1.5 more rounds. Audience members revealing what they had in common, protagonists speaking, and then one last time, audience members revealing what they heard in common. The event finishes not with the protagonist saying anything, but now we call on the three learned listeners to speak for 5 minutes each on what it is they might have learned from the event. The event is not over. It is important that when you break, that there be refreshments and space so that the discussion can continue. You want to encourage at least 15 to 30 minutes of more discussion amongst all the participants. Follow-up is critical. You want to videotape the entire session, and you want to make a transcript that is accessible to everyone. A wiki then should be created with a moderator so that you can get comments from all the participants over the next few weeks. Finally, send the transcript, the video, and the wiki to the two protagonists and ask them to come back with written commentary that can be available to the entire participatory community. In a Buberian dialogue, the audience is in a thou relationship with each other and with the protagonists. The audience members' reflections are evoked in creating the content that gets reacted to, that gets reflected upon, that gets turned into the step forward. This is an I-thou between audience and protagonists. In this way, Buberian dialogue creates a context for finding common ground. It allows hidden commonalities to surface. It encourages the building of relatedness amongst all the points that are raised. It affords audience members the opportunity to evoke or create personal stories around what took place, around their reflections, around their thinking. And Buberian dialogue, by itself, creates requisite variety amongst the points being raised. Buberian dialogue is built upon cybernetic tools. It evokes circularity between the audience members and the protagonists and among the audience members themselves. It demands reflexivity from the audience when they give their reactions, from the protagonists as they think about how to react to the audience reactions. It affords audience members the opportunity to construct and articulate perceptions, and it allows everyone involved, audience members, protagonists, etc., to co-construct a systems view of the topic, the context, and the dialogue. Instead of simplicity, Buberian dialogue makes use of the least action principle to focus on relatedness. It helps turn problems into progress by emphasizing relatedness instead of reinforcing divisiveness. Through Buberian dialogue, one can make use of cybernetic principles to overcome rancor and hatred. It's done through the careful nurturing of understanding and mutual respect. Respect among audience members, protagonists, and between them and each other. With relatedness and with respect, we now can help afford the possibility of progress.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Think of the attentiveness of this couple in reacting to the context, and think of the power of that gift of roses. My gift to you is far more humble. Thank you.